Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Next would be Senator Bennett, followed by Senator Cassidy.
I'm going to yield to Mr. Cassidy, if that's all right.
Nobody can say there's no collegiality in the Finance Committee. Senator Cassidy.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, the President keeps saying he does not wish to have cuts in social. Is he aware that under current law, when the program goes broke in 9 years, that there will be a 24% benefit cut for those who are current recipients? Is he aware of that?
Well, it's clear that Social Security.
But is he, I apologize for interruption, but I have limited time. Is the President aware that when social goes broke in 9 years, under current law, there's a 24% cut in benefits for people who are currently receiving?
If we don't do anything about it, I think that's about right. But
okay, let me
the
ask.
President wants to strengthen Social Security.
In
and
the
make sure that doesn't
$4.5
happen.
trillion of taxes the President has proposed, are any of those taxes going to shore up Social Security? I actually know that answer. The answer is of the $4.5 trillion in taxes he has proposed, not a dime is going to shore up Social Security. Does the President know personally anybody who is dependent upon Social Security, and if their benefits are cut by 24%, they will slide into poverty? It's hard for you to know, so I'll give you a pass on that.
The President knows many people on Social Security.
Then why doesn't the President care?
He cares very deeply.
Then where is his plan?
He stands ready to work with Congress
That's a lie,
to address.
because when a bipartisan group of senators has repeatedly requested to meet with him about social, so that somebody who is a current beneficiary will not see her benefits cut by 24%, we have not heard anything on our request. And we've made multiple requests to meet with the President. Now, you can't comment on that, I realize that, but that is a fact. And if you've been told to say he stands ready to meet, I will tell you there's absolutely no evidence because we have not gotten our meeting.
Well, I believe the President does stand ready to work
Well,
with
again,
Congress
empirically, that is not
to address
true.
this issue.
Now, the President in the past has proposed increasing taxes on those making over $400,000 to pay for it. Although he's not made that formally, he has said that in the past. Now, he's also proposed to tax them more to pay for Medicare and also to close the debt and deficit. So what would the rates have to be on that 2% of Americans who earn over $400K in order to do Medicare, the debt and deficit, and also to address our 75-year shortfall in Social Security? Do you have any sense of what the rates would have to be?
Well, he has proposed explicit increases in tax rates on very high income.
But do you think it's realistic that he can pay for Medicare, debt and deficit, and also address a 75% shortfall in social, a 75-year shortfall in social, by only taxing, the only thing he's going to do is to lay higher taxes on those who make more than 2%. I'm sure there's a projection of how much those rates would have to be. Can you tell us what those rates would have to be to do everything he is saying?
I can't tell you that, but I do know that he's put on the table many proposals that would raise very substantial revenues.
But of that $4.5 trillion, not a dime is going to social. And if you cannot tell me, I presume that they've not actually modeled what those rates would have to be, which tells me that he's actually not been developing his plan. Now, this is incredibly worrisome from a president who should be sympathetic with someone who, under current law, is going to get a 24% cut in her benefits.
The President is completely committed to protecting seniors who rely on Social Security.
Now, if we doubled our debt to GDP ratio, just theoretically, if you will, and aside from our conversation, if we double that GDP to debt ratio, what effect would that have on the economy?
So right now, and in the President's budget proposal,
Now, I'm asking you just the theoretical independently of the budget proposal.
if we were to double the debt to GDP ratio,
Yes.
I don't see why we would need.
But
to
if we
double.
did, just you're an economist, if we did, what would be the effect upon the economy?
Well, it would tend to raise net interest costs.
Would it be a negative effect on the economy? Of course it would be.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, of course it would be. We've actually modeled this. For the president to do nothing, let's assume that we cast aside current law and we just double the national debt, and that's what it would do. It would have a devastating effect upon the economy. CBO says they cannot model the deleterious effects that would occur because of that. So we have a situation where the president has not proposed a single plan. He has turned down multiple requests for meetings with senators, and our options are a 24% cut on a person currently receiving, doubling our national debt, which CBO says cannot be modeled, and you agree that would be a deleterious effect. And he's not modeled the tax rates that would be required if he just wants to raise taxes.
Look, what I know is that the president is committed to Social Security. He stands ready to work with Congress, and he's put on
I'm
the
out of
table
time. I don't mean to be rude, but
many
since I've had
tax
multiple
proposals.
requests on a bipartisan basis to meet with him and he's turned everyone down, that rings hollow.
My colleague's out of time, and I would just caution colleagues, we got plenty of differences around here, but accusing witnesses of lying is over the line.
I accept that, and I did not mean that for the Madam Secretary, who is merely saying that which she's been told. I'm saying it for an empiric observation when the president says he's ready to meet and he's turned down multiple
The time of the
times.
gentleman's expired, accusing witnesses of lying.
But I
is
did not
over the
accuse
line.
her.
Senator Cassidy.
Hey, Mr. Secretary, thank you, sir. We had kind of thank you for the dialogue before the meeting. We told you we're concerned about how do we know the people at HHS are working. So let me put this picture up. This is a picture taken at 10:40 a.m. last Monday at an HHS headquarters. It's like empty. And then we could have pictures of other parking lots that are similarly empty. Wow, the building's empty. If there's no cars, the building's empty. So we just appropriated $3 billion. Well, first, tell me this, please. Can you give a breakdown of how many full-time employees are at their desk in one of these buildings every day?
Senator, when you take a look at the workforce at HHS, and we're close to 90,000 throughout the country, and working in various parts of the country, some here in headquarters. By the way, headquarters, we have an underground.
I got limited time, so this may be misleading. So tell me, of what percent of the employees are at their desk, full-time employees are at the desk on any given day? And I don't mean to be rude, it's just so limited time.
No, and I appreciate that. And our folks are working full-time.
No, but how many are at their desk as opposed to being at home or someplace else, a coffee shop or whatever?
What we make sure we care about is that they're performing and they're delivering, and that's why.
Well, that's not really answering my question, because I know the best practices now in many industries is to bring people back in. So is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 1%? How many folks are actually sitting at their desk in a government building when they are working full-time every day?
And we have folks who, as they're working full-time.
So
come in
it's kind of not a... Clearly, sir, you don't want to answer that question. And I don't mean to be rude, but you don't. And that kind of begs that the answer may not be flattering. When CMS put out a request for employees as regards to the complex drug negotiations that was in a recent bill, the posting offers generous telework policy. What does generous telework policy mean? If somebody hired into that program, how many days a month would they be expected to actually be in a government building as opposed to wherever they wish to be?
And Senator, that would depend on the workers. Some people have never left their job, even during the height of the.
I'm not speaking about leaving their job. I'm speaking about being at their desk. And not speaking of some, but of a percent, if I may, because anecdotes are not data.
You're limiting the scope of what we do. We have investigators who never sit at desks.
Oh, but say, take somebody who traditionally would have been at their desk before the pandemic, please.
And depending on the work that has to be performed, they will be in the office at times. Sometimes they may be in the field. But what's
Can I
important
ask
is
just
performing.
for the record, because obviously it doesn't seem, Mr. Secretary, you're prepared to answer that question. But for the record, can you give us a percent of the actual workers who are full-time, who would be expected to be at their desk, not an inspector in Louisiana, but someone else, if you can give it that for the record?
We can follow up, Senator.
Can the agency provide us VPN data or some other measure of accountability that shows that the people truly are working from home?
We can certainly show you that they're performing. The fact that 700 million shots have gone into the arms of Americans.
But do you have that VPN data? Because initially when the pandemic started, we saw VPN data that showed a double-digit number of employees were not turning on their VPN every day. And so it suggested they were not accessing emails, for example. So is that data still being collected? If so, can you share those results?
I could try to get back to you on that.
Now, if you live in the D.C. area, you get a work differential. So you get a little bit more. Your cost of living is more. So is someone who is in this building with an empty parking lot, is someone in that building not knowing where they are currently working, are they still getting a cost of living adjustment as if they are working in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, first I have to tell you, Senator, that is not the headquarters of the HHS, of the Department of HHS.
It is CMS headquarters.
Oh, okay. So what we can get back to you on. Is someone working, as I said, we have been coming in, day out. We have been performing day in, day out.
But let's assume that, because I've heard from people within the agency that in reality people are only required to come in 1 day out of a month. And this has been something we've heard from CDC along those lines, but I've also heard from somebody who's working at CMS. Now, I assume that you have a global policy because you have the same union negotiating for all of HHS. So, it seems to me as if it's going to be the same policy wherever you are. So my question is, if you are working from home consistently, and originally you were based in D.C., are you still getting a cost of living adjustment even though we frankly don't know where you might be flying in 1 day a month, but living in West Virginia?
Again, Senator, I'm not familiar with this statistic that you're throwing out that says.
But is there a cost of living adjustment for people who are taking advantage of generous telework?
There is certainly a cost of living adjustment for folks who work in high-cost areas.
Even if they are teleworking?
If they are performing their work, they are entitled to receive a cost of living adjustment if they work in a high-cost living area.
And when you define work in a high-cost living area, do you mean telework? I mean, they could be in, their VPN could show them in D.C., but they could be in West Virginia. So are they getting paid as if they are living physically and showing up every day and parking in that parking lot every day in the D.C. area?
So you would have to take a look at the particular job description to find out what type of work is done and where they are located to be able to make that determination.
I yield.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I'm speaking about Social Security. Secretary Yellen spoke before the Senate Finance Committee last week, and for me it was incredibly frustrating. When asked if the President would be willing to work with Congress, she held up a piece of paper and read that he stands ready to work with Congress, to meet with senators, to find a solution to Social Security. If we're speaking about the President personally meeting with us, there's no evidence that that is true. That has not been our experience. Now, it's been well reported in the press that there is a bipartisan group of senators working to find a solution to save Social Security. The President knows this. We've been unable to get an appointment with the President. And the reason we keep requesting a meeting with him is because we're told that no deal will be made without his personal sign-off. He has to be the one who tells those who work for him that this is the deal he wants. So if the President chooses to do nothing, that choice guarantees that someone currently receiving Social Security will get a 24% cut in the benefits that she receives. Now, let me just emphasize that. I was on talk radio this morning with Keel in Shreveport, Louisiana. Erin McCarty says, well, I'll be okay. I don't know how old Erin is, but she thinks that because she's of a certain age, she will not be affected. No, current law is if the President chooses to do nothing, Erin and everyone else who would currently be receiving Social Security will get a 24% cut in their current benefits. Someone who's depending upon this income to pay her bills, to buy her groceries, she gets a 24% cut in the amount that she's receiving. So there needs to be a choice between a massive, by law, 24% benefit cut, again, current law, and a real plan, a real choice to strengthen, to save, and to secure Social Security. To reference President Reagan, this is a time for choosing. We can't wait, because the longer we wait, the more expensive and the more drastic the solution becomes. And we shouldn't allow politicians to use Social Security as a political weapon to beat people into submission, to claim that one side wishes to do nothing and they're going to rescue it, while offering nothing to stop this scheduled 24% cut. It may be good politics, it is irresponsible. Now, I will point out that President Biden's two Democratic predecessors, Obama and Clinton, both offered serious plans to address this looming Social Security fiscal cliff. President Biden, no plan, not in his budget. And in fact, when Secretary Yellen, when I asked her if they had modeled any of the things that she was referencing as a solution, they've not modeled it, which tells me they've not worked on it. There should absolutely be a sense of urgency. He should feel it the way that I feel it. I used to work in a hospital for the uninsured. Many of my poor patients, they depended upon social to pay their rent, to buy their groceries, to pay their utilities. I know what a 24% cut would mean to them. Now, by the way, on the solutions that we've been trying to come up with, an approach, if you will, certainly not a final plan, there's a lot of partial and inaccurate information. And by the way, we did that on purpose. The president has a right to have an imprint upon the final thing that we come up with. So we have things which are, yes, we could do it this way, but maybe do something else. We do add something to it, though. We think it's a novel solution that helps Social Security bridge the solvency and protects the Americans who rely upon it. And we add some things. One thing that we've spoken of, perhaps locally, but not nationally, is that those who are most cut by a 24% cut will be the police officers, the firefighters, the teachers, and many other state and local government officials who are unfairly penalized by two provisions in current law known as WEP and GPO. From my perspective, repealing WEP and GPO should be part of any conversation we have with the president if he agrees to meet, and should be part of any final proposal. But Americans of all generations, the silent generation, the boomers, the Gen X, the millennials, the Gen Z, they want to know that the program they've paid into their entire lives will be there when they need it. Now, it's a political truth that some issues are seen as a political third rail. I say choosing to do nothing, which means choosing that Social Security benefits will be cut by 24%, should be the third rail. We can't be guided by the fear of politics. We should be guided by the courage of our commitment to the American people, and particularly that American Senate senior, that he or she will not get this 24% cut. I ask once more, President Biden, please personally meet with a bipartisan group of senators. If I said something I shouldn't have to Secretary Yellen, I will at that point apologize. President Biden has a reputation as a deal maker. Let's make a deal. With that, I yield.
You are now recognized for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Sanders. I disagree. Ms. Sue, nice to see you. I can actually disagree with Senator Sanders. And as much as I think of Ms. Sue, as highly as I think of Ms. Sue, and as pleasantly as I regard you, I will disagree with Senator Sanders and can say with a straight face that I do not think that you should be Secretary of Labor. The committee's priority should be, and put differently, and to use Senator Sanders' words, we need a labor secretary who is fair and unbiased when enforcing the nation's labor laws, who should be a leader who is responsible, experienced, and skilled, not an activist, with a demonstrated record of competence as an administrator and a demonstrated record of successfully concluding labor negotiations. But there are, as Senator Sanders points out, serious concerns about Ms. Sue's record. As Secretary of California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, Ms. Sue was the chief enforcer of AB 5, controversial law that dismantled the gig economy such as Uber, DoorDash, Lyft, and removed the flexibility of these individuals to work as an independent contractor. Senator Sanders suggests that all workers would be united in supporting this nomination. Those independent contractors opposed AB 5. Ms. Sue expressed herself as merely being an enforcer of a law passed down by others, but I've spoken to people in California that said Ms. Sue was quite the cheerleader for the law.
Now, to be clear, independent contractors, freelancers make their own hours and choose the type of work they wish to do. They're shielded from forced or coerced unionization that would strip that flexibility away. This has made eliminating freelancing a top priority for large labor unions, those that are endorsing this nomination, who want more workers paying forced union dues. It's important to know, even in California, AB 5 is unpopular. The governor and state legislature had to pass over 100 exemptions after it was implemented. In fact, the statutory exemptions are longer than the text of AB 5 itself. 59% of Californians voted to further erode the law, which naturally labor unions challenged in court. In 2019, Ms. Sue described employers who opposed California's overreaching law as not understanding the economy that, quote, her quote, we want in California. As acting and Deputy Secretary of Labor, Ms. Sue is overseeing the Biden's administration push to eliminate independent contracting via federal executive rulemaking to the detriment of workers. If finalized, the new regulation would strip 21 million individuals of their ability to be independent contractors, enjoying the flexibility this provides. A law rejected in California is not a policy that should be spread across the nation. I also wish to hear Ms. Sue's position on the Department of Labor's effort to uproot the franchise model. She had said privately that she will not pursue this, but the franchise model employs over 8 million Americans. She has made public comments in support of a new joint employer rule, which would impact the almost 800,000 franchises operating in our communities. Saddling franchisors with liability for thousands of franchise owners that operate as small businesses would be a sure way to destroy the system of franchising, a model which has empowered underrepresented groups in the business community, such as women and people of color, giving them the opportunity to live the American dream, becoming successful small business owners, creating jobs, and lifting other workers out of poverty. No one is surprised that the joint employer rule is a major priority for large labor unions. It's easier to pressure one company to unionize to increase union dues than to pressure thousands of independent businesses. President Biden promises to have the most pro-union administration in history. At her nomination announcement, Ms. Sue responded saying, quote, "Sign me up for that. I want to help." The priority should not be whatever it makes it easier to forcibly and coercively unionize workers while undermining the business model that employs them. Now, as a Republican, I don't expect to agree with the political positions of a Biden nominee, but we should expect that the heads of our federal government are not driven by activism to carry out an agenda for a favored political group. We need leaders who will responsibly carry out the duties of the office and give all comers a fair shake. It is also the responsibility of the Secretary to be a good administrator. As Secretary of the California Labor and Workforce Development Agency, as Senator Sanders points out, Ms. Sue oversaw the Employment Development Department, the EDD, the state's unemployment program. This program lost over $30 billion in fraud by waiving fact-checking requirements recommended by Department of Labor guidance. The California State Auditor reported, quote, "Despite repeated warnings, EDD did not bolster its fraud detection efforts until months into the pandemic, and it suspended a critical safeguard." Under Ms. Sue, fraud in California was rampant. Rapper Nuke Bizzle was arrested, pled guilty, and ordered to pay $705,000 in restitution after posting a music video bragging about how easy it was to defraud the EDD program. The lyrics include, quote, "I done got rich off of EDD. Ain't hit no more licks 'cause of EDD. Just last night I was selling peas, and I just woke up to 300 G's. For the record, my interpretation is 300 G's is $300,000, but he was ordered to pay over 700 G's back in restitution. The rapper was not held accountable because of Ms. Sue's oversight, but because he publicly admitted to his crime on a rap video. I ask unanimous consent to insert a transcript of Nuke Bizzle's music video entitled EDD into the record.
You're into rap, we're going to put it into the record.
This mismanagement does not inspire confidence that Ms. Sue can run a multi-billion-dollar organization. Now, by the way, former Labor Secretary Marty Walsh developed trust with the business community as well as labor unions. Setting his politics aside, Marty Walsh had significant experience in negotiations and managing organizations. That experience is important. But now with 150 labor contracts expiring this year, the potential of replacing him with someone who has a history of bias and no direct experience handling labor disputes should be concerning to all. I look forward to hearing from Ms. Sue as she addresses these concerns of the committee. With that, I yield. Let me just first express admiration for your incredible personal story. And all of us are one or two generations from a story like that, and yours is more immediate, so let me just first express that. Speaking about policy issues, though, AB 5, controversial, in many quarters in California, unpopular. You supported and helped implement. In 2019, you described that those who do not want to comply with the overreaching law as not understanding the economy that, quote, we want in California. And the we want is kind of a royal we. And it's important to note that the legislature had to go back and pass almost 100 exemptions. So I say that because I think one thing that concerns us, would you commit to not trying to force an AB 5 type regulation upon the rest of the country, that which was done in California?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The short answer to your question is yes. The context to your question is that the ABC test in California was first adopted by a unanimous California Supreme Court decision that was written by a Republican-appointed Chief Justice.
Now, isn't it fair to say that this AB 5 greatly expanded that decision and covered workers that were not necessarily covered by that decision but went far beyond?
Well, following that decision, the California legislature did pass AB 5 that codified the test. To be extremely clear, I was not part of the legislature. I have never been a legislator. I have tremendous respect for what you all do. I have not done that job. And so the ABC test was codified in California. It's not the only state that has it. But when the Department of Labor issued our rule on independent contractor versus employee classification, we explicitly did not include the ABC test in our rule. So that is why I answer yes to your question. Only Congress can adopt the ABC test. I cannot, I will not.
There are other things that could be done through a rule that gets at the same point, even if it does not include the ABC. So is that an equal kind of commitment to not attempt to do through rule that which may be absent ABC but otherwise has the same sort of effect?
I will commit with absolute certainty and commitment that I will always have full faith and fidelity to federal law.
Now that's different because I can promise you I've learned to give me a smart attorney and they can find all sorts of interpretations of federal law. Up is up and down is down, but no, sometimes up is down. Let me move on though, just because I've got limited time. When we met, you said you would not pursue changes to the joint employer regulations if confirmed. We know this is a priority for labor unions. Could you again and for the record give assurances that you will not pursue changes to the joint employer rule as Secretary of Labor?
So, Senator, I know you mentioned the concern about franchisees and franchisors, and I enjoyed our conversation. I mentioned that my family, my parents had a franchisee business. The reason my sister and I were able to go to college—
I got limited time.
Okay, so I understand the importance of the model. There's not a joint employer rule on our regulatory agenda. It was not on our agenda that came out last year. We have
and is that to say it would not become on the agenda at a later point?
It will not be on our agenda that comes out in June. Correct, Senator.
Next, Ms. Sue, thank you. There's about 150 labor contracts coming up representing 1.6 million workers expiring this year. And one of the concerns about your nomination is that you lack direct experience negotiating and handling labor disputes. And so can you point to any experience negotiating successful outcomes from labor disputes?
Thank you very much, Senator, for that. So I did work very closely with then Secretary Marty Walsh on the negotiations that concluded on our part in September that involved the rail unions and the rail employers.
It's fair to say that it actually took Congress and the President to step in and to conclude those negotiations. Those were not successful. Fair?
When we concluded our 20-hour negotiation, a tentative agreement was reached reached that averted what everyone was then saying would have been a national disaster. It is true that there were other parts of the process, as there always are in collective bargaining negotiations at the table. The other thing, to your question, Senator, is that one of the other big issues that's looming is what's happening at the West Coast ports, the ports of LA and Long Beach, in my hometown, involving parties and people that I have known for some time, and I have been actively engaged in that conversation as well.
Now, it's fair to say, though, that those seem to be breaking down. There was a press release in February with optimism, but subsequently there's been other reports not quite so optimistic. So it'd be a stretch to say it's a successful process, correct?
They're not concluded yet, Senator. That is true. My role, if confirmed, would be to, when asked, help make sure that the parties stay at the table, that they are able to grapple with some of the hard issues that they face, and that if asked to come assist, I would do so. I would not give up on those negotiations at this time, Senator.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter articles in a letter concerning the ongoing disruptions of the West Coast ports to President Biden from over 300 retailers, urging him to step in and negotiate between the union and management to prevent disruption to the supply chain of American consumers.
Without objection.
With that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more Democrat discriminating against Republicans. You know what I'm saying? That's all I can say.
Senator Cassidy, you snuck in, brother. You sure did.
Thank you. You're a king among men. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. Madam Secretary, when we spoke with Deputy Secretary Turk some time ago, at issue was the definition of clean hydrogen that DOE has proposed. We were very specific in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that should be about at the point of production, and yet the Department of Energy has made it a life cycle definition. How could, I mean, like, tell me, you weren't supposed to do that. You're going against Congress's explicit direction. So can you comment on how you felt you had the latitude to specifically go against that which Congress had directed?
The definition, I know, is about low emissions, right? And so the question about whether it's point or life cycle, I know has been significantly worked within the department. Maybe it would be helpful for us to sit down with the head of our joint strategy team on.
That would be great.
So
Please,
that we can
because
talk through that.
Because my office helped draft that, and
Yeah.
we were very particular.
Okay.
And the law particularly states the way that we particularly wished it to particularly say. So as we speak about particulate matters or whatever else, you see where I'm going with that.
Let us particularly sit down and figure that out.
Also, in the IRA, let's see, here. Earlier, Senator Manchin asked you about a definition you provided to Treasury for battery manufacturing and processing. Now, the DOE decided to change the definition in the IRA and effectively undercut domestic producers, directly affecting projects such as the Sierra project in Louisiana. So again, it seems like they're changing definitions that were explicitly defined by Congress. Is that something else we should meet upon?
Well, we certainly can, but the definition of how the DOE has recommended to Treasury was directly from the bipartisan infrastructure law, which had a definition of processing in there. They didn't want to go back and redo what Congress had just passed. So they used for the IRA the same definition as was in the bill.
So then, have I been misinformed? Because it's my understanding that the rule that DOE put out, the definition that DOE put out, was different than the one explicitly stated.
No, I think what Senator Manchin was referring to was that there was a grant that was given in the battery grants to a company under manufacturing, and that's the provision that they applied under. We didn't move them around. They would have qualified under either being a processor or a manufacturer. We left them where they were, but we didn't redo the definition.
Okay. Now, going on, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or OSED, is supposed to help establish demonstration projects. It's missing deadlines all over the place. It really is. initially announced and then changed by a DOE. A deadline set forward in the infrastructure bill, changed, and then again missed. We can send you chapter and verse on that. The OSED budget, though, wants more funding to go after projects not authorized in the Energy Act or the infrastructure bill. And so it just, if you're not accomplishing the task set before you by law, and you want more responsibility and more money, that just doesn't seem to it seems inconsistent.
Well, they have been working incredibly hard to get all of these programs and the funding for them out. I'm not sure which ones deadlines were missed, so I'd
send
like
you back up on that.
Well, yeah, that would be great. But they are going to be a center of excellence within the department on large-scale demonstration projects, which is something the Department of Energy hasn't done in the past. They've done small-scale demonstrations, but these are large-scale projects like the hubs, direct air capture hubs.
Big responsibility, which I guess is begging the question why they want additional responsibilities.
Well, what we want to have them do is to make sure they have the skill sets as well as the ability to, on a long-term basis, advise other arms of the department on these major demonstration projects to be the center of excellence. So we're really proud of what they're doing. And
Last question, just because I'm out of time. I understand the department has met with LNG exporters about a clean gas standard in order to measure methane emissions. Can you tell us about the nature of the conversations and the major themes discussed, the next steps, the specifics that buyers are looking for as regards cleanliness of U.S. gas?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think it is important that when we do exports, particularly of LNG, but also, gas that's inside the United States, that we button down our methane. And I think the industry believes that as well, because it's a waste to have methane vented. So the question is, how do you do that in a way that certifies that this is this is gas, where they've taken care of that methane, the methane emissions? Is there an independent entity, for example, that's trusted by all, to be able to help certify that? And those are the kinds of discussions we're having. It's still in the formulative stage, and we're happy to talk with you about input, but we are meeting with industry to make sure that we get it right.
Yeah, I look forward to that and would like to be engaged.
Great.
Thank you, I yield.
The Senate will soon vote on the Congressional Review Act, a resolution of disapproval to overturn the Biden administration's unfair student loan schemes. These schemes transfer the burden of $400 billion in federal student loans from those who willingly took on that debt to American taxpayers who never went to college or who've already fulfilled their commitment to pay back their loans. The resolution would also end the pause on student loan payments, which by August will cost taxpayers almost $200 billion. President Biden has extended this pause 6 times for a total of 31 months, far beyond the original justification of the ongoing pandemic. Make no mistake, these reckless student loan schemes do not forgive debt. They transfer burden from those who willingly took out the loans to go to college, to make more money when they graduated, to Americans who never attended college who already paid back their loans. These policies are as unfair as irresponsible. Where is the forgiveness for the guy who didn't go to college but is working to pay off the loan on the truck he takes to work? What about the woman who paid off her student loans but now struggles to afford her mortgage? Is the administration providing them relief? No. Instead, the administration would not only have them pay their bills, but the bills of those who decided to go to college to make more money. President Biden's plan does nothing to address the problems that created the debt in the first place. It doesn't hold colleges or universities accountable for rising costs. According to the College Board, in the last 30 years, tuitions and fees have jumped at private nonprofit colleges by 80%. At public four-year institutions, they've jumped 124%. According to the Center for a Responsible Federal Budget, if the student loan transfer goes into effect, students and taxpayers will be back in the same situation in 5 years. In 5 years, we'll be right back where we are now because we're not reforming that which got us here. And total debt will again reach $1.7 trillion.
what is the plan for 5 years from now? This scheme does not ensure that students are prepared for life after college. It creates terrible moral hazard that signals to students that federal student loans are not real commitments. It tells colleges that no matter how high they raise their prices or how low the quality of the education they provide, the federal government will cover the tab, courtesy of the American taxpayer. This is not leadership. We cannot spend our way out of the problem of ever-increasing cost of higher education. For Americans who cannot afford their debt, or who want a proactive approach to paying off their loan commitments, Congress has already authorized 31 different active programs that help or forgive student loans. That's 31 different programs already in place to help forgive or offset student loans. They range from total forgiveness for teachers to loan cancellations for law enforcement officers, military, early childhood educators, and social workers, to name a few. There's also repayment programs for high-demand fields where education is specialized and the need is a public good. For example, through the Department of Health and Human Services, a variety of different healthcare providers, including therapists, behavioral health providers, and those needed to help our children as we face this mental health crisis, are eligible for loan repayment. In addition, there are 5 different programs already to keep payments low compared to a person's income and which cap the total time for repayment. The mass transfer of debt, though, under this reckless student loan scheme forgets that these existing programs were set up to target limited taxpayer resources to benefit those using their degrees to serve and to fill broader public needs, or who could demonstrate that they themselves had a personal individual need. Our resolution prevents average Americans, 87% of whom do not have student loans, from being stuck with a policy that the administration is doing not to be fair to all, but rather to favor the few. Our resolution also protects the rule of law, which President Biden must know that he is violating. During Supreme Court arguments on the legality of the student loan forgiveness in February, Justice Roberts clearly indicated that if $400 billion was to be spent on student loan cancellation, it would require congressional approval. That has not been given. This is a clear example of this administration attempting to subvert Congress for what appears to be purely political purposes. It sets a wildly dangerous precedent if left unchecked. President Biden, Secretary Cardona, come to the table. There are real problems in the student loan system and federal financing of higher education. Let's fix them legally through a bipartisan, lasting solution. I will close by encouraging all my colleagues to join me in voting to pass this Congressional Review Act resolution to prevent these unconstitutional student debt forgiveness schemes. It is unfair to the hundreds of millions of Americans who will bear the burden of paying off hundreds of billions of dollars of someone else's student debt.
Cassidy.
Hey, Dr. Bertinelli, I got lots of questions, so if I interrupt you, please be tight with your answers, and if I interrupt you, I apologize in advance. You said during your staff interview you support the reasonable pricing clause included in the recent contract with BARDA, but you were not familiar with the NIH experience in the 90s. Clinton administration NIH Director Harold Varmus stated when rescinding the policy, extensive review indicates that the pricing clause has driven industry away from potentially beneficial scientific collaborations, and eliminating the clause promotes research that enhances the health of the American people. Research America, an alliance of hundreds of organizations advocating for biomedical research, expresses concerns about the policies that would, quote, discourage the uptake of breakthrough discoveries by the private sector. This would be detrimental to patients. Would you apply reasonable pricing clauses to NIH contracts if confirmed?
So, Ranking Member Cassidy, my absolute utmost priority would be securing effective treatments.
Now, that's not my question.
Affordable.
My question.
So,
would you apply reasonable contract pricing clauses to NIH contracts?
I cannot commit to any specific action at this time.
I'm asking you to commit to not an action.
but I will work with you on this issue because I share your desire to make sure people have access to the
Well,
treatment.
of course, my concern is, based upon Dr. Varmus's experience, that if you do institute, you're going to stop the translation of basic research to taking care of patients. This is not something that we need to kind of pussyfoot around. History tells us that if you do it, patients are damaged, despite whatever rhetoric would be out there. So I hope that you would be more forthright in your kind of embracing this issue. We've got scientific evidence. My gosh, if we're doctors, we should actually look at the evidence, not listen to the rhetoric. I say that because I know that patients are going to be damaged by this, and that should be our highest calling. I don't mean to rag, but I just get frustrated. Okay. Also, what about march-in rights? You mentioned that you want to lower costs. People argue for march-in rights. Your predecessor, Francis Collins, consistently said during his tenure that the NIH does not have authority to use march-in rights to lower drug prices. It goes against congressional intent if you only use it to lower drug prices. Do you support using march-in rights to lower drug prices, quote unquote?
Again, Ranking Member, I cannot commit to any particular policy right now, and my...
Now that is, though, it specifically says in the law that you're not supposed to use it. It gives you 3 ways to use it, and one of them does not include lowering drug prices. I mean, we're just asking you, are you going to follow the law? That would be the action.
I will follow all the laws of our land, certainly, and again, my goal will be to make sure that people get the treatments that they need.
Sounds good. Sounds like, with that answer, it sounds like you're answering my previous question that you wouldn't do the other thing. Let me ask you about another issue. Secretary Becerra chose not to continue an NIH Ethics Advisory Board reviewing extramural fetal tissue research for appropriateness during the previous administration. And presumably a panel like this would help achieve what you tell me your preference is of ensuring fetal tissue is only used as a last resort. I am told there were members of this board who supported fetal tissue research, but still rejected some of the research projects put forward by NIH for the board's review because of a lack of informed consent. Now, you stressed the importance of informed consent in an earlier answer. These pro-fetal tissue advocates rejected these proposals because of the lack of informed consent, but Secretary Becerra has discontinued this board, providing that safeguard. Do you agree with Secretary Becerra's decision to not continue this board?
Senator, I do not have enough information about those specific actions to really comment on Secretary Becerra's decision. What I can affirm for you is that any research needs to be conducted according to the most stringent ethical principles.
I accept that, but this board was making sure that was the case, and it rejected some of those. It was the mechanism by which what you were telling me was actually executed. The informed consent was not done. If we stipulate as a theoretical that what I laid out the facts are correct, would you support reinstituting the board?
Again, I can't comment on the specifics of that activity. I can just say that if confirmed, I will uphold the principles of ethical human research.
It's been 4 years almost since the COVID-19 pandemic began. We still actually don't know where the virus originated. Many studies and reports have explored plausible alternatives. Experts agree that further research is needed. Do you believe the federal government should do everything it can to determine the cause of COVID-19, including the possibility it emerged from a lab that was conducting gain-of-function research?
Ranking Member Cassidy, I think no one wants to know what the true origin of the last COVID pandemic was more than the biomedical
And how will you
research
accomplish
community.
that?
To the fullest extent of our ability to gather the data and have access to the data and make a valid assumption.
And making it public?
Make data that we have available public and accountable to the American people, yes.
Okay, I yield.
Thank you, Senator Hickley. We have Senator Cassidy.
Yeah, and I would argue that we're not going to make our same progress against climate change if we choose to get our oil and gas resources from areas of the world that have lower environmental standards. It's been documented by a national lab that the production in the Gulf of Mexico has the lowest carbon intensity of any oil that comes to our nation to be refined. Since we know we're going to be using oil,
Why not get it where there's a lower carbon intensity and, oh, by the way, creates American jobs? So, Ms. Coit, there's been a kind of perception that this administration is intent upon killing with the death of 1,000 cuts domestic oil and gas production. Tell me how this 10-mile-per-hour limit on speed on boats in the Gulf of Mexico applied only to those involved with oil and gas industry, not the military, not the recreation, not the fishing, not to, you name it, only to those, how this doesn't represent hostility by the administration to the jobs that the working Americans have in that industry.
Thank you, Senator, for that question. I want to deconflate two things. There is a biological opinion from 2020 that requires a 10-knot speed for the oil and gas industry in the core Rice's Whale area.
Now,
Which is in
define core.
It's in the eastern part of the Gulf.
Eastern.
Yeah, there was a map. I don't think you were in the room.
I saw it. So it's eastern, not stretching to the Texas coast.
That's where the current vessel speed restriction applies. I think you're also then referencing the, there is a
stretch across the Gulf of Mexico, where there's been only one confirmed sighting of a rice whale, period, end of story. Others are unconfirmed, and yet it applies only to vessels involved with offshore gas development.
The reason for that is it was the result of a Section 7 consultation under the Endangered Species Act for a federal action related to oil and gas development when we considered impact.
If it were really considered that important, you would stretch beyond that section into all others. Now, we can leave it as another argument as to whether or not it's justified. The setting of one whale and no other that has been confirmed to have something which is so far-reaching is, again, the reason why folks think this is a part of a pattern of a death of 1,000 cuts of all the jobs associated for working Americans in that industry. Succinctly, can you tell me why that perception would not be true?
I don't believe it's true. I believe we're able to implement the Endangered Species Act while allowing productive oil and gas development.
But 10 miles per hour does not allow for productive oil and gas.
And that we've done that. At the moment, I think you're referring to a proposed critical habitat map when you're talking about the sightings. And I believe you were out of the room when I mentioned that we also have consistent passive acoustic monitoring that demonstrates.
I'm told that there's been no confirmed sighting, and the one that had been proposed by the Coast Guard was later retracted because they said that it was the wrong species, and so that there is no evidence. It's just, let's find a reason to justify the rule.
The rule is intended to mitigate threats to Rice's whale, and we have the best available science demonstrating that they.
There's always kind of and I don't mean this to be offensive, but the last refuge of the scoundrel, and I don't mind calling you a scoundrel, I'm just making a quote. Last refuge of the scoundrel is saying that's what the science says. And we've seen consistently how that's been used to manipulate the American people. Yes, at times science clearly says something. It clearly does. But at other times that's kind of a refuge for a rule. Well, science says it, so therefore we've got to go there. There has been one confirmed sighting of a rice whale outside that core area, ever. And that's being used to create a band from Florida to Texas through which, in an uneconomical way, vessels required to develop outer continental shelf oil can only go at 10 miles per hour. But no other vessel, not military, not recreational, not fishing, et cetera. Now, if you're the guy and the gal making your living, sending your kid to a better school because you work in an industry related to that, as many in Louisiana and other areas do, you got to feel like you got a big target on you by the Biden administration. They're coming after me. They're coming after my job. They don't care about me. They just care about their agenda, which tends to be ideological and not associated with my own economic needs. And that's what the science says is the easy kind of rope-a-dope. But there's been one sighting. I've used all my time on this one rant, and I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a few minutes since someone asked people to be brief. Mr. Fain, the headline just came across. Stellantis offers buyouts and early retirement to 6,400 U.S. non-union workers as the auto industry hits turbulence. Now, you don't know for sure, but after the very good contract you awarded, they're now laying off 6,400 people.
Yeah.
It seems like a little bit of a tube of toothpaste. If you squeeze here, it's going to do something down there. And I think that would be something that Ms. Furchtgott-Roth would point out. Any thoughts on that? And again, be brief, because I got other questions.
Talking to the mic.
They don't
there.
have to.
Yeah, all right.
I'm sorry?
Talking to the mic, please.
I'll give you 12 billion reasons why that doesn't have to happen, okay? When Stellantis took over, they went on a price cutting, on a labor cost cutting
Now,
initiative.
but that was about a decade ago, so be
No,
thank you.
Stellantis just took over, within the last 4 years.
Okay.
But when they took over, they wanted to cut their way to profitability, but they do it on the backs of workers, and they don't have to cut those jobs. They chose to cut those jobs. Has nothing to do with our contract. They made $12 billion in the first 6 months of this year, and are continuing to make billions as we went through the bargaining process. So, again, to me, it's just it's short-sighted goals to recognize profits, and I've heard this said over and over by leaders in the past. You can't cut your way to profitability, and it's a short-sighted way of doing business, and it's not sustainable for the long term. So,
Okay, so Mr. O'Brien, yellow trucking is obviously going belly up, it appears. And they had come to the Teamsters in June, I'm just reading press reports, and asked for some help. And it specifically mentioned you that we're not going to, get tough attitude is how the article put it. And now they've gone belly up. There's reports that the Teamsters came back in August to try and make things better, but by that time it was too late. Now, there it seems, again, going back to the witnesses, Mr. Higgins and Ms. FGR, that this kind of approach brought a company under, and now we have a lot of Teamsters who are going to be unemployed.
All due respect, Dr. Cassidy. All due respect, Dr. Cassidy, that's inaccurate on the yellow situation. This yellow situation has been going on since 2009, where our members have given back in concessions with the recommendation of the union to try and save this company since 2009, $5 billion in wages and benefits. And this company was awarded under the Trump administration a $700 million loan, right? And the company's just been mismanaged. And they did not come to us in August. They came to us early on. We tried to work with them and find solutions to the problem. All the while, after their initial meetings, they started, and we found this after the fact, they started draining. They told us they'd be out of money by August, and that if we didn't help them, then they would go under. All the while, they were taking their executive bonuses as CEO pays. And
but in the scheme of things,
they can blame anybody they want. That company was mismanaged since 2009. There's facts and records to show exactly what our members have given.
And I won't argue about the quality of their management. It does seem, though, that when I read the benefit packages that the drivers got, they would argue that they could not afford that. But that's their perspective. And I'm sorry, I just have limited time. Ms. Furchtgott-Roth, I remember distinctly that Mr. Fain had made comments that the rapid transition to all EV vehicles was part of what was contributing to the loss of jobs. I saw a cartoon, the green economy will create jobs. Unfortunately, most of them are in China. You commented as well on that in your testimony. In response to Coach Tuberville, Mr. Fain kind of soft-pedaled that, but any thoughts on that? In effect, President Biden's environmental policies have contributed to some of this loss of jobs in the auto industry.
Microphone.
Mr. Fain did say very clearly in April of this year, shame on politicians for moving forward to 100% EVs because this is bad for our auto workers' jobs. So I was especially puzzled why, during the negotiations, he didn't try to get these auto workers to drop their own self-imposed goal of going all EV by 2035. And Mr. Fain has just said that he's got some of the internal combustion engines to move back from offshore, but they're not going to be able to use them after 2035. At least they say they're not going to be able to use them. They say they're not going to use them. So why is that? It's not under the law. So he should be able to persuade them that his members' jobs are more important, plus what Americans want to buy, small businesses, farmers, they all need cars with internal combustion engines.
Mr. O'Brien, this is also the help committee, and the P stands for pensions. And it was mentioned earlier, I think, by Mr. Higgins, that the Central States Pension Fund had received money to help bail out their, I think, $36 billion or something like that, to bail out them in arrears. It's my understanding that the roster submitted by the Central States Pension Fund had nearly 3,500 dead individuals submitted to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. Somebody commented it's a little bit like the voting rolls in Chicago. But as a result of this, the pension fund was awarded $127 million in additional bailout money. Now, is the pension fund going to refund that to the American people?
Well, I would assume it would, and I assume the government would go after that if that's
I
really
think
what
this
happened.
administration has made the decision that they're not going to, but that's the kind of administration decision. That's actually not kind of a taxpayer-type decision.
Well, look, I'll go on record as saying if someone was given something they weren't entitled to, they should refund it.
Sounds great. Can I quickly on Mr. Higgins? Mr. Higgins, you mentioned on the joint employer rule it's a boon to employees. I think my understanding is if you have a subway and you've got 7 employees and 4 of them vote to unionize, that young entrepreneur or that person of color who's got their first business has to unionize. And of course, with increased cost and hassle. Any quick comments on that? Because the chair is being indulgent, but still, quick comments?
Well, as far as the joint employer goes, it doesn't directly impact unionization itself, but in terms of it does sort of bleed back towards the corporate parent, and that's, I believe, the intent here. If you're organizing, you have to organize, in their franchisees, you have to organize them piecemeal by one. But if the franchisor is considered the joint employer for all of its franchisees, then you can simply direct your campaign at the franchisor corporation and do it that way. And I believe that's the sort of underlying impetus.